The Titanic was doomed before it ever left harbor. Quick plug, like and share. Now the Titanic was a steamer ship, meaning that it had to have a large supply of coal on hand to power it. This meant that the Titanic had to have about 22 coal bunkers in its engineering level. But what would happen if one of the coal bunkers were to catch fire? The HMS Titanic was a British ship filled with an anthracite coal, known as Welsh steamer coal, the A+ of coals. This coal would auto-ignite if the temperature meets 600 degrees centigrade, something that will happen when the coal was stacked in a large pile. As pressure creates friction, and heat, the best way to prevent a fire would be to soak the coal, but this would increase the time needed to prepare the coal before it could be used, but they soaked it to prevent a fire. Now high pressure, and a confined space leads to high temperatures. So while the top layer of coal was wet, the bottom layers could very well be on fire. Which is exactly what the report of the marine firefighter, J. Dilly said about his time on the Titanic. Quote from the Stevens Point Journal, from Saturday, 27th of April, 1912. 13 days after the sinking. I was assigned to the Titanic from the Oceanic, where I had served as a fireman. From the day we sailed, the Titanic was on fire, and my sole duty, together with 11 other men, had been to fight that fire. We had made no headway against it. Of course the passengers knew nothing of the fire. It started in bunker number 6. There were hundreds of tons of coal stored there. The coal on top of the bunker was wet, as all of the coal should have been, but down at the bottom of the bunker the coal was dry. The coal at the bottom of the bunker took fire, and smoldered for days. The wet coal on top kept the flames from coming through, but down in the bottom of the bunker the flames were raging. 2 men from each watch of stokers was told off to fight that fire. The stokers, work 4 hours at a time, so 12 of us was fighting the flames from the day we put out of Southampton till we hit the iceberg. No, sir, we didn't get the fire out. And among the stokers there was talk that we would have to empty the coal bunkers after we put our passengers off in New York and then call the fireboats there to help us put out the fire. But we didn't need such help. It was right under bunker number 6 that the iceberg tore the biggest hole in the Titanic, and the flood that came through the Titanic put out the fire that our tons and tons of water hadn't been able to get rid of. The stokers were beginning to get alarmed over it, but the officers told us to keep our mouths shut. They didn't want to alarm the passengers. Another fireman said that because of the fire the ship sank more rapidly than otherwise would have been the case. It had been necessary to take the coal out of sections 2 and 3 on the starboard side forward, he said, and when the water came rushing in after the collision the bulkheads would not hold because they did not have the supporting weight of the coal. Somebody reported to Chief Engineer Bell that the forward bulkhead had given way and he replied, "My God, we are lost." End quote. Now when dealing with a coal fire, the best way to quell the problem is to spread it out over a large area, allowing it to burn itself out. But as the fire was located in the boiler level on a ship, there were a few options. Try and saturate the fire with water, which would mean more time would be needed to dry the material before it could be used, or use the material before the unplanned fire consumed the material. Meaning, tossing more coal than necessary into the boilers, which would lead to an increased speed. It is likely that this method of disposal of burning coal, which would have increased the speed of the ship, could have been one of the main reasons that the ship had struck the iceberg, causing it to sink. This wasn't helped by the fact that the ship was seen as unsinkable, giving people a false sense of security, likely causing them to overestimate the ship's abilities and resiliency. What is known, is that the Titanic was a massive vessel, having a gross registered tonnage of 46,329 and was traveling at a speed of 22 knots or about 41 kilometers per hour. The ship was slow to react. When First Officer William Murdoch was notified of the iceberg, he ordered hard to port around, which would involve the ship swinging itself to the left so the bow would miss, before swinging the opposite direction so the stern would miss it. The lead fireman, Frederick Barrett, has testified that the stoplight had been signaled, instead of the needed one propeller reverse, but the order came too late. The right side would come into contact with the iceberg, leaving a gash in the ship's hull, nearly 91 meters long. So did the coal fire sink the ship? Not entirely. Malfunctioning equipment hindered communication between ships. They believe that because previous icebergs failed to sink other ships, like the SS Kronprinz Wilhelm, which survived ramming an iceberg, then the Titanic would be fine. Potential hull problems, as recovered hull fragments show shattering instead of bending, and the wrought iron rivets used in the hull would not help the ship. As a Royal Mail ship, the vessel would be expected to meet deadlines. Many ships of the air would run the engines near their limits, meaning that it wouldn't be that maneuverable. All of these factors combined to sink the ship. At least with the sinking, the coal fire would finally be extinguished.